Got a brother from another mother over here, I think, and it's been an honor to be a part of the conversation. I wanted to start with Jesus. Well, hopefully I end with Jesus too. But I want to start with Jesus because I think that's where we've gotten confused, especially in the current state of white evangelicalism in America. We've kind of lost our center on the cornerstone of Jesus, and when we lose focus from Jesus, we end up talking a lot about things Jesus didn't talk about, and we don't talk about the things Jesus had a lot to say about. And I think that we begin to get confused about who we are, and that's happening as we speak. And I'm delighted to be here, though. It feels right and wonderful. And let me start with this verse. I'm going to read from Luke chapter 7. And just to set the scene a little bit, in this text, John the Baptist is in prison. Okay, I think many of us know John the Baptist was Jesus' cousin, right? They grew up together. He baptized Jesus, so they've been in this. He was a wild man, John the Baptist, right? Kind of wearing camel skin, eating locusts, living in the desert. I'm pretty sure he had dreadlocks, but wouldn't bet my salvation on it. You know, he's a wild man, and he's in prison, got in trouble, and I don't know exactly what all is going on inside of him, but I'm imagining he's getting ready to get executed. He is in prison. I'm sure he's kind of ready for the kingdom. You know, he's ready for this thing to go down, for what they've been waiting for. And he sends his disciples out to ask Jesus a really specific question. John's disciples are to ask Jesus, "Are you the one that we've all been waiting for, or should we expect somebody else?" And this is Jesus' answer. So it says this in Luke 7. When John's disciples came to Jesus, they said, "John the Baptist has sent us to you to ask, are you the one we've all been waiting for? Or should we expect someone else?" Now at that very time, Jesus cured many who had diseases, sicknesses, and evil spirits. He gave sight to the blind. So he replied to the messengers, "Go back and tell John what you've seen and heard. The blind receive sight, the lame walk, the lepers are cured, the dead are raised, and the good news is preached to the poor." I love that answer, right? Because he sort of throws the question back at them. You know, are you the one we've been waiting for? He's like, you tell me, right? like, look at the signs. Like, he has evidence. He allows his life to speak for itself, right? And it's very characteristic of Jesus. He doesn't go around walking up to people flaunting it. You know, he's not like, "Hi, I'm the Son of God, and what was your name?" You know, but he invites everybody to follow. And one theologian said so beautifully, he said, "From Jesus we can learn that the gospel spreads best not by force, but by fascination." And I think that that's exactly what Jesus does. He fascinates the world with God's love. And it does stir in me the question that if we're followers of Jesus, right? Jesus said, in John, "You'll do the same things I've been doing. You'll do even greater things. And I'm going to live in you," right? Like, they'll know you're my disciples if you do what I did, if you love like I love. And so if people were to ask us, "Are you followers of Jesus?" can we say, "Tell us what you see and hear"? Do we have the same signs of liberation and good news that follow us? And I think, sadly, what we must confess is that over the last few decades, much of our Christianity has become less and less fascinating to the world. That we, as one of my friends said, we've given the atheists less and less to disbelieve in, right? And so often, all we have is doctrinal statements and words, and sometimes Christians have so many words we can end up becoming an obstacle to Christ because all we've got is words, right? And yet, like, the world is longing for love, and we haven't always been instruments of love. A study was done in the United States where one of our major polling companies, the Barna Research Group, went to every state in the U.S. and they asked young non-Christians in every state, what do you think of when you hear the word Christian? Right? The number one answer was anti-gay, anti-homosexual. Number 2 was judgmental. Number 3 was hypocritical. I'll stop there because the list doesn't get much better. And I know everything's perfect over here in the UK. You know, like, you got a much better reputation, I'm sure. But like, and what broke my heart was what people said. Like, that's not what people said when they encountered Jesus, right? People didn't encounter Jesus and walk away scratching their heads going, why doesn't that guy like gay folks? Right? People were magnetized by His love. And it's that which I think, like, you know, I don't know what people say about Christians, you know, but I know what made our list, and it was those things. And it went on to, you know, irrelevant, prudish, out of touch. Like, those were the things people were saying. And what also broke my heart was what people did not say. And what didn't even make the list, it didn't even register on the chart, was the very thing that Jesus said they will know we are Christians by, which is, I'm so glad you knew that, love. You know, like that love, the fruits of the Spirit, gentleness, goodness, kindness, joy. Like, those weren't the things people love. So I'm so excited tonight to dream about Jesus with you and to say, what does it mean to come back to Jesus again, right? To invite Jesus to live through us, because that's what it means to be the body of Christ, right? The life we live, we no longer live, but Jesus lives in us, and we get to be a part of the incarnation. My neighbor speaks Spanish as her first language, and so it was wonderful. She was saying, sometimes, you know, in the seminaries and stuff, we overcomplicate all of this. You know, she said we hear things like incarnation, and she said it doesn't need to be that complicated. You order your burrito con carne, and it means with meat. Right? And Jesus is God incarnate in flesh, in love with skin on. God manifest to us in a way that we can wrap our hands around. That's what Jesus is. And now we are invited to be a part of that incarnation. We are to make God's love manifest. That the gospel cannot just be taught, it has to be caught, right? It has to be seen. The best sermon we have is our life. And I think in reality, if people want to say, if we want to teach the world God's good news, it has to be seen and touched and tasted and felt. And that's what we've been working out. We've been trying to figure that out in Philly, and how we bear witness in such a broken world today. So I wanted to show you some pictures, because really what I want to talk about tonight is imagination. Because I think that's what the church is starved for. And that's what I love about New Forms, is you've got imagination, creativity, innovation. And that's what we've been trying to figure out, is what does it look like to be this church with imagination in the world we live in. So our community started out of a struggle. And in this church building, you're going to see that we in itself, this was a testament to the state of the church in many neighborhoods. This was an abandoned Catholic church building. The windows are all busted, and you know, it was an abandoned building. And a group of homeless mothers saw this abandoned building, and they began to live inside of it. And that caught our attention. And I was a student about a half hour away, and we began to move in and come in solidarity with those families. And those families became our teachers and our mentors. And it ended, we had like worship services in there. They stayed for months and months, and many of them got housing. And then we moved into the neighborhood. So you're going to see some people. Oh, by the way, I got married in here. So that was my lovely wife and I. This is fun for me too because I'm kind of missing home a little bit. I've been away all day. So that's my wife, and that's half of our neighborhood that is in that church, and that's the old cathedral. We got married in there, and then we moved into the neighborhood, and this is that's us riding off on our tandem bike there. That was our stretch limo, to our honeymoon right there, and the cans, going behind us. But that's my neighborhood, and I think as you see a few of these pictures, like when we think about a place, part of what we have to create is a theology of a place, right? That God is calling us to a neighborhood. So what does it mean to bear witness of God's love in this place, in this context? And for us, we've got a lot of abandoned buildings. We've got abandoned factories, abandoned houses. And so we are always talking about resurrection, right? And the early Christians talked about resurrection not just as an event that happened 2,000 years ago. I mean, that's undoubtedly the pinnacle of history, but Jesus' resurrection reframes everything, right? The early Christians said, we practice resurrection every day. We live in light of resurrection. We are Easter people, that we now bring things back to life. And so you'll see a few pictures here of stuff where we find life, and we live the gospel kind of in the streets, and in our neighborhood we find community. We eat meals together. We have celebrations, and this is what church looks like to us. This is our back to school celebration where we bless all the kids as they go back to school. It's hard enough to get excited about going back to school, So we have like 1,000 kids that come, and the priests and pastors from our neighborhood bless them, and we have a 2-story water slide. Come on, with liability insurance. But that's our street party as we celebrate the kids and we bless them and send them off to school, and we have celebrations almost every month. This is our little Mother's Day party where we celebrate all the moms in our neighborhood and we bless them. We have Bible studies and worship and meals, and it's happening out of our homes and dinner tables. I like to believe, like many of you, that that church doesn't just happen in our big buildings. It happens in our dinner tables and living rooms, right? It happens as 2 or 3 of us gather in the name of God, and that's where we see the gospel every single day. And when we think about resurrection, I think as we're formed into that, like it begins to affect the neighborhood, right? It begins to, we see stuff coming back to life now. We make some of our gardens out of trash, like a sink you find. And we've got houses that were abandoned. That we get abandoned houses, and we work with each family to build a house. So the family does like 350 hours on their own house, and we team them up, we finance it, we do a 0-interest mortgage, and so all the money the family pays goes off in the house. We don't sell any of them for more than $35,000, and I know all y'all want to move in now, but anyway, like and this is a house that we brought back to life. You'll see a garden here that was, filled with trash and abandoned, and we brought that back to life, and it's a beautiful place where we grow food now, and you'll see this piece here where we had a fire that burnt down a block of our neighborhood. It started in one of the abandoned factories, burned down our block, and then over the last 8 years we've rebuilt it. It's exciting, because that's like this. It feels like we are a part of this vision of God restoring creation, and I can get excited about this because this isn't our work, it's God's work, but we get to be a part of it, right? And we're reclaiming space now, painting murals, seeing, that's a Banksy one, by the way. It says Banksy at the bottom of it, just for the record. But anyway, that's the side of my house. We're painting murals everywhere we can because the world is starved for beauty, right? And these murals become like stained glass windows. They radiate God's love and life, and that's what we get to do, right? So this is kind of some of what it looks like for us. But I wanted to, oh, by the way, it's a federal crime to paint a mail postal container, just for the record. We found out the hard way. But anyway, that mural there, you can see our theology on the wall, right? The lion, the lamb, the dove, they're together. The rolled away stone, and there's a street party at the bottom. The kids painted the bottom. All the pastels were the kids fingerprinted. They're painting on that. And then, like one of my neighbors, she said, every time I walk by, this used to be a really, really troubled corner. She said, every time I walk by, it's like God's watching, looking over, protecting the neighborhood. She said, that is a stained glass window, right? That is our testament of God's protection and love and fruit coming out of our space. And now, as you see some of these, we've that's our front door. So it's our prayer. We pray every morning, heal all that is broken in our hearts, in our streets, and in our world. So I think part of what we've got to do is just be creative as we ooze into this world, right? It doesn't have to be weird, but we can put our prayers on our walls. We can get into the streets. This is a funny story. I forgot I put this in there. This was an abandoned lot where the factory burned down. So this is city land, and we began to reclaim it. And the city said, "Oh, this is worth a lot of money. You can't take this land." And this is where the abandoned factory burned down. And we began to reclaim it and just pray over it. And we put a big old banner that had, after several years after the fire, it said, "Dear City of Philadelphia, it's been 6 years since the fire. Can you give us this land?" And it made the front page of the papers and stuff. And we had 1,500 signatures from our neighbors and all these city officials that said, you'll never get this space. They all came. They're like, it's such an honor to build a park here with you, So, oh, right? So, this is like, it feels like God is in it with us, right? God is in it with us. And now that park we call Phoenix Park, right? Because it's rising out of the ashes. And that's... now you can keep praying for us, because this space we're building a community center on now, and a place where neighbors can gather, and a health clinic, and a library where we can have spiritual resources, and an exercise gym and things like that. So that's our space. And part of what we're doing too is I think we get lost from creation and all the concrete, So part of what we're doing is just cracking the earth, all this concrete we put, so everything can breathe again. And these are some pictures of our gardens of growing food, and it's so exciting because when the kids, they're picking this stuff, and when they pick their first carrot or something, it's like magic, They're like, yeah, And one of my favorite days was one of the kids was coming down the block, and he was really hysterical. So at first I kind of was scared that he had there's an emergency or something. He's like, come here. He pulls me all the way down the block to point out a firefly, right? A light number. He goes, "What is that?" And I told him, I was like, that was a really great day for God. God was like, I'm going to make a bug that's glows in the dark. But that's the wonder of creation, right? That we get to reclaim. It's now some of these that you're seeing. These are things. Like our aquaponics. So we're growing fish underground, and we're growing plants off the fish. And so that's how you have to grow food when you don't have much soil, right? So we're getting creative. But one of my neighbors, she said, oh yeah, you'll see the Swiss chard and everything that we grow in there, kale and superfoods. And so we're able to give food out to 50 neighbors that we harvest, off this little piece of land. And one of my neighbors, she got so excited, she goes, I get what we're doing. I said, what? She said, we're trying to bring the Garden of Eden to North Philadelphia. I'm like, boom! Right? N.T. Wright couldn't say it better than that. Let me tell you, right? That's our theology. We're bringing the Garden of Eden to North Philly. That's what we get to do. And it has everything to do with God. Some of my evangelical friends, they'll be like, well, what's this garden and stuff got to do with Jesus? I'm like, everything in the world. If you look at every study, if everything you look at is suffocating in concrete and dying in decay, it's hard to stay convinced that there's a beautiful God. But when you see fireflies and you see praying mantises and cardinals and you see raspberries and blueberries you can pick, it feels like there is a God that's on the side of life and on the side of creation, and that has everything to do with the gospel, right? So that's what we get to do. But now I want to say that, and this is where I wanted to really spend some time dreaming and praying with you, because that's our little experiment. But I think what we also have to do as a church, and in particular, at such a time as this, is that we are, hold right there, brother. What we get to do is to be a prophetic witness, right, to the world that we live in. That Dr. King said that the church is neither meant to be the servant nor the master of the state, but we are to be the conscience of the state. We are to expose injustice so that people have to respond, that they get uncomfortable because they see suffering, because everything in our world, we try to avoid suffering. We want to live away from it. So we amplify the voices of the oppressed. We expose injustice. We want people to see the pain of our brothers and sisters. And that's what we also have to do, this work of being a prophetic witness. And for us, that has meant asking the questions of what is the obstacle of God's kingdom, right? What are the things that are getting in the way of people realizing how beloved and beautiful and precious their life is? What are the things that are squashing people's dignity and holding their hope hostage? What are those things? And one night, the gunshots rang out, and not an unfamiliar sound, but we ran out to the porch, and this young man fell on our front steps, and I held his hand, and he was still alive. I prayed for him, and the next day we found out that he had died. He was 19 years old. His name was Papito. And it was heartbreaking. And there comes a point where Dr. King said, we're called to be the Good Samaritan and lift our neighbor out of the ditch. But after you lift so many people out of the ditch, you start to say, maybe we need to rethink the whole road to Jericho. Maybe we need to reimagine these streets a little bit so that we don't keep seeing people landed in the ditch. So right after Papito's death, it was actually the season of Lent, leading up to Easter, and we really felt the Spirit moving in us to take our liturgy and take our worship into the streets, right? Right near our house is one of the worst gun shops in our country. A gun shop that is in the worst 5% for having guns sold irresponsibly in ways that end up landing on our streets. And so we began to vigil outside of that, but it culminated in one of the most powerful services I've ever been a part of. It was our Good Friday service, right? So we gathered out front of the gun shop. The young men in my neighborhood carried the cross. And I want to tell you, it felt like spiritual warfare. I want to just show you a little video clip of one of those vigils that we did outside of the gun shop. You'll see us praying. I show that with a heavy heart, because this is what's happening in our country right now. And I show it not to shame those folks, because I think we all know so well that we are not wrestling against flesh and blood, but we are wrestling against principalities and powers, and they run deep. And I think I only began to realize, some of my brothers and sisters know that because they've been in the struggle for a long time. But I began to realize it when I saw things like this. When we go for a prayer vigil and we have death threats, right? We go for a prayer vigil and we hear people say some of the meanest things I've ever heard in my life. And so what happened on this day was we carried the cross on Good Friday to the gun shop. We read the story of Jesus' suffering as he died on the cross with forgiveness and grace and love on his lips. And then the women wept at the feet of the cross. We read the story. But then after that, we invited the mothers in our neighborhood who had lost their kids to tell their stories. And they wept. And there was something kind of mystical and surreal where Calvary met Kensington, right where the suffering of Jesus met the suffering of my neighborhood on my streets. And I remember this woman came up afterwards, she's weeping, and she says, I get it. I understand something I've never understood before in this way. And I said, what? Tell me. She said, God understands my pain. God knows what it feels like to lose your boy. And I realized it was Papito's mom. It was Papito's mom. And she understood the gospel, right? And that gospel is that God is with us. God knows what it feels like to lose a son. The power, I think, of worship and liturgy when it connects to the streets is unbelievable. It's this powerful thing that I've seen over and over. And this is just, one story. You'll see a few other pictures here of, we've had other powerful people of faith that have done stuff in our country. That's our sister Bree Newsom, who took down the Confederate flag. And as she's doing it, she is praying. She is giving praise to God like a courageous woman of faith, right? I think the question for us and for you in your particular place is, what does it mean to bear witness right now, to expose injustice, to publicly lament? And when it happens, what happens when we are light in darkness is that we live fearlessly, right? We know that love conquers evil, that nonviolence is more powerful than violence because it exposes that violence. And so as we see some of the iconic images in our country, the most powerful are when nonviolence is able to expose these principalities and powers. I want to say, this is one public vigil where the protesters held mirrors. So the police were invited just to look into the mirror and to see the violence that they were meeting nonviolent protesters with. So the imagination is, the world's hungry for it right now, right? I think as we imagine, what does it mean to be that prophetic witness with a distinctly Christian witness? During Holy Week, these were signs that were used in the States that connected the suffering on our streets with the suffering of Jesus. And they were a longing, I think, to say that Jesus is in the struggle, right? Jesus is in the struggle. Stay there just a second, brother. So as we've been thinking about that witness, it's not, I think the racial justice, the police violence, all of the gun violence, that's one of our things. But one I think that connects with what you're doing here and the struggles that you have is how we care for immigrants, right, and refugees. And I love that we've heard some ugly things and about the wall that's going to be built and all this stuff. But also I think what's beautiful is I've seen so many churches that are using this opportunity to bear witness of God's love. And this is one in Chicago. I love it in LaSalle Street Church. They put in this giant banner that says, of course we welcome refugees, we're Christians, right? And it's that witness which in Philadelphia we had a whole movement called the New Sanctuary Movement that was churches and Christian families that became hospitality places. And in fact, it began to change our whole government. So our city government unanimously voted to not comply with federal deportations. We became a sanctuary city, right? And it was the church in the middle of that, right? Saying we don't need politicians to tell us how to treat immigrants. Like, we can read the Bible and we see we're to welcome the foreigner as if they were our own flesh and blood. We're going to bear witness of that, right?